In this recording, we're going to discuss reading aloud and its role in your content area classroom. So before you continue watching this video, I'd like you to stop and consider the following questions. You might even want to jot down a few notes before you continue. I'd like you to think about why reading aloud to students might be beneficial in a content area classroom like math, science, or social studies. And I'd like you to think about how you can incorporate reading aloud into your content area classroom. And as you're watching this video, I want you to keep these questions in mind. These are sort of guiding questions for viewing this recording that I want you to be thinking about. So before I start, I would like to read to you this quote. This is from Mem Fox, who is a really well-known children's writer. She says, "Research around the world has proven that children who are read to regularly are better able to learn to read easily, happily, and quickly. Listening to beloved stories again and again is a step on the road to literacy that cannot be ignored, no matter how gifted a child might be or how disadvantaged. No matter what grade that child is in or how young or old, no matter when he or she starts school, no matter which country he or she lives in." And I really like that quote because I feel like it really gives you a good sense of why reading aloud is so important, and it says it in such an eloquent way. This quote is a much better argument for reading aloud than anything I could ever give you. I just feel like it's very well stated, so I wanted to share that. So there are a number of benefits to reading aloud in your classroom. One is that reading aloud is enjoyable for students. A lot of people enjoy being read to, myself included. I know I love it when someone shares a book with me, and that doesn't happen a lot, as an adult and as a university professor, but I enjoyed it as a child. I also enjoyed it when I was a pre-service teacher like yourselves, and my professors read children's literature to me and my classmates. It's just something that a lot of people like. So that's one reason why you will want to consider reading aloud in your classroom. Also, reading aloud is important because it gets students familiar with a range of genres, assuming that you're reading aloud from a wide variety of books. For example, different genres have different conventions. For example, the genre of fantasy will have conventions such as elements of magic and science fiction and so on. So when students are exposed to books that fit into those different genres, they begin to become familiar with those genre conventions, which can help facilitate their comprehension of books belonging to different genres. So that's important. It's also important because when you read aloud books to children, they become familiar with a wider array of books than they might seek out on their own. It gives them a sense of familiarity with books that they might not otherwise be aware of. For example, in this class, you read Caper Rescue and The Voice That Challenged a Nation. Now, you might have come across those books on your own at some point, but now you're familiar with them because you read them in this class and they were recommended by me as your instructor and so on. So it helps familiarize you with books that you might not have encountered on your own. And the same goes for when you read aloud books to your students. Your students might be more likely to pick up the books that you read aloud for their own independent reading. So that's another important reason why we want to read aloud. Also, reading aloud is important because we give students access to books that might be too challenging for independent reading. So oftentimes when we read books aloud to our students, we pick books that are a bit challenging for them but are accessible for them to listen to. So that in turn exposes them to more complex themes as well as more advanced vocabulary, and listening to these words being used in context can therefore also build their vocabulary. So lots of benefits. And when you read aloud to your students, you're also giving them a model of what fluent reading should sound like. If students aren't exposed to fluent reading, then they don't know how it's supposed to sound when they read aloud. So that's another important reason why we want to read aloud to our students. And when you read aloud informational books like Caper Rescue or like The Voice That Challenged a Nation, you're also building students' content knowledge. You're building their knowledge of the disciplines like math, science, and social studies. And all of these things in tandem can lead to better reading performance on the part of your students. So as you can see from that slide and that discussion, reading aloud is really important. And I know some of you are parents, and reading aloud is also important in the home setting, not just in the school setting. But all of you are, working towards becoming teachers, so I want to, make sure you understand it's important that reading aloud occurs in the school setting. I also want to take time to differentiate between reading aloud and shared reading. So reading aloud is when a teacher reads aloud to the students and the students listen. And shared reading is slightly different. The teacher or another proficient reader reads aloud to the students, and the students listen, and they also follow along with their own copy of the book that the teacher or the more proficient reader is reading aloud. So there's a slight difference there. So reading aloud and shared reading can be used in a number of ways. One is simply to enjoy literature. When I was a 4th grade teacher, I had a 10 or 15 minute period for a snack every day. And instead of just like wasting that time and have students just sit and eat their snack, I read aloud to them. So that way they could, eat their snack, but they could also concentrate on enjoying a story. And that was one of their favorite times of day because I like to pick books that I thought would be appealing to the students. And usually they enjoyed the read alouds. Reading aloud and shared reading is also a way that you can make the textbook that you're using in your classroom more accessible to all of your students. Oftentimes, textbooks are written at a reading level that might be above the grade level of your student. So say if you're teaching 3rd grade and you're using a textbook, it might actually be written at a 5th or 6th grade level, which makes it very, very challenging for the vast majority of your students. So one way I got around that is to actually utilize this technique of shared reading to make the textbooks I read with my students more accessible to my range of readers. Now, you don't want to just, read the whole textbook chapter all at once. You want to read meaningful chunks of the textbook and stop and discuss, check for comprehension, and so forth. So don't just, read aloud the whole chapter all at one time. And reading aloud and shared reading can also be used to support content area instruction. As you know, textbooks don't tell you everything you need to know about a topic, but you can often fill in with quality children's literature. Now, from past lectures in this course, you already know a good deal about informational books, about nonfiction, and how you can bring those into your classroom, and also how to identify quality nonfiction. But content area instruction can also be supported with genres like fiction as well as poetry. For example, when I taught 4th grade, we had a unit about United States geography, and we learned about all the different regions of the United States. And when we studied the Southwest region, our textbook talked a little bit about the Alamo and what happened there, but it didn't really talk about it a lot, and I thought that was something that would be especially interesting to students. So I bought this book called Voices of the Alamo, which is actually a book of free verse poems all about the Alamo's history, and it's written from the perspectives of different people. For example, Native American people that once occupied the land where the Alamo stands today, people involved with the Battle of the Alamo, and so forth. And, even though it was a book of poetry, it did help facilitate the students' knowledge about the Alamo and the Battle of the Alamo. Also, works of fiction can support content area learning. For example, if you are learning about saving the environment, you might want to read a book like Hoot, which is about children who become environmental activists. So even though it's a work of fiction, it's made up, some of the themes can still help teach that idea of conservation and being an advocate for the environment. Also another book, this won a Newbery Honor in the last several years, The Mostly True Adventures of Homer P. Figg. As the title suggests, it's a work of fiction. The narrator is very unreliable and tends to exaggerate, but this book could certainly be used in conjunction with a unit in social studies about the Civil War, because the main character lives during that time, and the character finds himself in situations such as in the middle of the Battle of Gettysburg, and he describes what that's like. So that book, even though it's a work of fiction, might support students' understanding of what it was like to be a kid during the Civil War. So, even informational books are really important to use in content area teaching. You shouldn't discount the value of works of fiction as well as poetry. So in order to develop your understanding of how to effectively use reading aloud in your classroom, I'm going to have you watch a couple of YouTube videos all about best practices for reading aloud to children. I have also uploaded a graphic organizer to Blackboard, and I would like you to watch these two videos and take notes in the graphic organizer so you become more familiar with best practices for reading aloud. And as you're watching these videos, you might also want to think about how you can incorporate the information provided into writing prompt number 4, which is due on July 25th. So if you have any questions about reading aloud, please feel free to ask. Thank you.